"Get out of this house before I come back, or I will drag you out myself," Adwell roared. He flung her clothes onto the dusty floor, laughing as they scattered, while neighbors' doors creaked open in curiosity. Abeni stood barefoot, frozen, clutching a calabash of warm kunu that slipped from her hands and shattered at her feet. The drink spilled like blood across the ground, and in that moment her marriage broke with it. The morning sun had barely risen over Ibadan, yet the compound already trembled with disgrace. Adwell straightened his richly embroidered agbada, pride swelling in his chest, as if cruelty were strength. "I am done with this useless life," he declared loudly. "Today, I bring my new wife here, a woman worthy of me." His words echoed against the walls they once painted together. Abeni said nothing. Silence wrapped her like a second skin. Calm and deliberate, Adwell scoffed and stepped closer, eyes scanning her body with open contempt. "Look at you!" he sneered. "You have grown heavy, slow, unremarkable." He shook his head. "This is not the woman I married. This is not the woman I loved." He paced like a victorious hunter. "Any woman can cook and sweep," he said sharply. "You sit here all day, eating and waiting for me to provide. No ambition, no vision." His voice dripped with disgust. "You are nothing without me." He paused, waiting for tears, for begging, for collapse. None came. Abeni slowly bent down, placed the broken calabash aside, and wiped her hands on her wrapper. Then she laughed. It was soft, controlled, almost unsettling. Adewale froze. "Why are you laughing?" he snapped. "Have you lost your senses?" She looked at him calmly, like an elder watching a child boast. "No," she replied gently. "I simply found it amusing." Her tone carried no bitterness, only certainty. Adwell felt a flicker of discomfort but crushed it quickly. He grabbed his car keys. "Be gone before I return," he warned. "I am bringing a woman who matches my level." Abeni nodded once, as if agreeing to an already decided fate. The gate slammed shut behind him, and the compound fell into a heavy stillness. Abeni stood alone, listening to the echo fade. This house, built with a patience and silence, suddenly felt like borrowed ground. She walked into the bedroom and pulled out a suitcase hidden beneath the bed. Each fold of clothing awakened memories she had buried for years. She remembered laughter under mango trees, promises spoken beneath moonlight, and the day she chose to step into the shadows so another could shine. Love had turned into judgment, and judgment into chains. Her hands trembled briefly. Tenstadied. This was not running. This was preparation. Her phone vibrated softly. The name on the screen read, "Council of Elders." She answered without hesitation. "Hold the meeting today," she said evenly. "I will give my final approval later." When she ended the call, her expression hardened with resolve. This was no ordinary woman being chased from her home. Sunlight filtered through the window, catching dust in the air like floating spirits. In the old folk tales, the quiet ones are never weak, only waiting. Abeni closed the suitcase and stood tall. She looked into the mirror, meeting her own eyes, steady and unafraid. As she lifted the suitcase, she whispered softly, like a prophecy carried on the wind, "When you return, you will see who I am." The elders often say that when the palm tree stops dancing with the wind, it is listening for judgment. As Abeni stepped out of the bedroom with her suitcase, the compound felt unusually still, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Even the birds that usually argued on the fence had gone quiet. Something unseen had begun to turn, and the land knew it before the people did. Abeni placed the suitcase near the doorway and sat briefly on the wooden stool beside it. Her breathing was slow, measured, the way her grandmother had taught her during long evenings of storytelling. In those tales, strength never announced itself with noise. It waited, patient and observant, until the right moment revealed it. Abeni rose again, smoothing her wrapper, her posture steady and unbent. She walked through the compound one last time, touching the walls lightly as if greeting old friends. This was the place where she had poured her silence, her endurance, and her wisdom. Adwale believed silence was emptiness, but he did not understand that quiet soil often hides the deepest roots. Each step she took carried intention, not sorrow. A faint hum drifted from her lips, an old tune her mother used to sing while grinding pepper. It was a song about women who carried kingdoms without crowns. Abeni had learned early that visibility was not power. Control was. While Adwale paraded titles and praise, she had chosen the unseen path, the kind that watches, measures, and remembers. Her phone vibrated again, once, then twice, resting calmly in her palm. Messages from board members, advisors, and partners filled the screen, all waiting for her word. She did not respond immediately. Power, like fire, must never be rushed. She slipped the phone back into her bag and reached for the gate latch. Outside, the street buzzed with its usual rhythm. Hawkers called out prices, buses groaned under heavy loads, and children chased one another barefoot across the red earth. To anyone watching, Abeni looked like an ordinary woman leaving her home. No one could see the tide moving beneath her calm surface. Asewaited, memories returned uninvited. She remembered the day she chose to stay hidden, when her enterprises began to grow beyond expectation. She had wanted to know people as they truly were, without fear or flattery. Masks fall easily when no one believes you matter. Adwale's cruelty had only confirmed what she already knew. A car engine roared in the distance, drawing closer to the compound. Abeni did not turn. She already knew who it was. Adwale was returning, proud and loud, carrying arrogance like a trophy. The thought did not disturb her. In the stories of old, the hunter often celebrates too early. She lifted her suitcase again, standing near the entrance, composed and ready. Whatever entered through that gate would meet a woman fully awake. She was no longer the wife who waited. She was the judge the moment required, and the palm tree, still silent, continued to listen. Before the gate opened, Abeni heard the sound of laughter spilling into the street, loud and careless, the kind that announces itself without invitation. It came mixed with confident footsteps and the click of expensive shoes against concrete. The noise did not belong to the compound. It invaded Italiano. Abeni tightened her grip on the suitcase handle, not in fear, but in readiness. The moment she had been waiting for was no longer approaching. It had arrived. The gate swung open, and Adwale stepped inside as though he owned the morning itself. His smile was wide, polished, victorious. Beside him walked a woman tall and elegant, her head held high, her dress sharp and modern, her perfume arriving before she did. This was Zainab, the woman Adwale had chosen to replace silence with noise. She scanned the compound with quick, assessing eyes, already imagining herself rearranging its history. Adwale laughed again, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Abeni," he announced proudly, spreading his arms. "Meet my fiancée." He squeezed Zainab's hand lightly. "This is the woman who understands me, who matches my level." His voice carried triumph, the kind that feeds on humiliation. Zainab smiled politely at first, until her eyes met Abeni's face. The smile vanished instantly. Zainab stopped walking. Her breath caught in her throat, and the color drained from her cheeks. She stared, blinking once, then twice, as if her eyes were lying to her. "Madame Abeni," she whispered, barely audible. My boss." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Adwale laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Boss," he repeated, amused. "Don't joke like that." He waved his hand carelessly. "This is my soon-to-be a woman who has never worked a day in her life." He turned to Abeni with a smirk. Tell her how useless you are." Zainab's heart pounded loudly in her ears. She shook her head slowly, confusion and fear twisting her features. "No," she said weakly. "That's not possible." Her voice trembled. Last week, at the company meeting, she was introduced as the owner. Adwale's laughter died instantly. Silence fell like a heavy cloth over the compound. Adwale's smile froze, then cracked. "What nonsense is this?" he asked sharply, but doubt had already crept into his eyes. He looked at Abeni, searching her face for denial. She gave him none. She simply stood there, calm, unmoving, her presence suddenly enormous. "Yes," Abeni said quietly. Her voice cut through the tension like a blade through cloth. "It is true." She shifted her suitcase aside and folded her hands gently. "I am the owner, and I am your employer." Each word landed carefully, deliberately, leaving no room for escape. Adwale staggered back a step, disbelief washing over him. "No," he muttered. "That's impossible." His confidence crumbled, visibly, like dry earth under sudden rain. Zainab's knees weakened, and she clutched her handbag as though it could steady her world. "I kept my identity private," Abeni continued, her tone steady. "I wanted to see people for who they truly are." She looked directly at Adwale. "Every step you climbed was allowed. Every promotion was approved." Her eyes hardened. "And you used that position to humiliate the woman who made it possible." Zainab lowered herself slowly to the ground, tears spilling freely now. "Madam, please," she begged. "I didn't know." Adwale opened his mouth, closed it, then sank heavily onto the bench near the wall. The hunter had walked straight into the snare. Abeni picked up her suitcase, once more. "I am done packing," she said evenly. "You asked me to be gone before you returned." She glanced around the compound one last time. "I have obeyed your command. The elders say the river does not shout when it changes course. It simply moves, and nothing remains the same." The silence that followed Abeni's words was heavier than shouting. It pressed down on the compound, thick and suffocating, leaving no room for denial. Adwale stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, his confidence drained so quickly it was as if it had never existed. Zainab's breathing grew uneven beside him, sharp gasps breaking the quiet. In that moment that truth was no longer something to argue with, it was something to survive. Adwale took a step back, then another, his heel catching against the bench. "No," he said weakly, shaking his head. "That's not possible." His voice lacked force, stripped of authority. He looked at Abeni again, searching her face for doubt, for mercy, for anything that could undo what he had just heard. Found none." "You never told me," he said, desperation creeping in. "You let me believe." His voice broke. The man who had shouted orders that morning now sounded unsure of every word. Zainab turned toward Abeni slowly, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. "Madame," she whispered. "Please, I swear I didn't know he was your husband." Abeni listened without interrupting. Her face showed no anger, no triumph. "You never asked," she said to Adwale calmly. "You assumed." She shifted her gaze to "And you saw what you wanted to see." Her words were firm but controlled, not raised, not cruel. That calm made them heavier. Zainab's knees gave way, and she sank to the ground, clutching her handbag like a lifeline. Tears streamed freely now, ruining the careful image she had carried in with her. "Please don't fire me," she begged. "I worked hard for that job." Adwale turned toward her instinctively, then stopped, realizing he no longer had the right to protect anyone. Adwale lowered himself onto the bench, his hands gripping his head. "I was wrong," he muttered. "I didn't know who you were." The words sounded hollow, even to him. Abeni stepped closer, not to comfort him, but to be heard clearly. "I know who I am," she replied. "And now you know too." She took a slow breath. "This marriage is over," she said plainly. There was no drama in her voice, no hesitation. Adwale's head snapped up. "No," he whispered. "Please." His panic spilled over. "Not like this." Abeni didn't respond immediately. "Our daughter deserves peace," she continued. "She deserves a home where her mother is respected." Adwale's shoulders slumped. The reality of losing his family hit harder than losing his pride. He said nothing. There was nothing left to defend. Abeni looked around the compound, taking it in one final time. "This house belongs to me," she said. "You have 2 days to pack and leave." Her tone was steady. "Final. After that, it will be sold." Zainab sobbed openly now. Adwale stared at the ground, defeated. Abeni picked up her suitcase and turned toward the gate. She didn't rush. She didn't look back. She had said everything that needed to be said. The truth had done the rest. The sound of the gate closing behind Abeni did not echo, but it landed hard. It was final. Like a decision that could not be appealed. Adwale remained seated on the bench long after she was gone, staring at the space where she had stood moments earlier. His chest felt tight, as though the air itself had turned against him. For the first time that morning, he was alone with what he had done. Zenab stood slowly, wiping her face with trembling hands. Her eyes avoided Adwale's, not out of fear, but disappointment. "You told me she was nothing," she said quietly. "You told me she depended on you." Her voice cracked as the image she had believed in collapsed. Adwale opened his mouth to answer, but no words came. "I admired her," Zenab continued. "I worked for years, hoping to meet her one day." She laughed bitterly through her tears. "And all this time, I was standing in her house." She shook her head, stepping away from him. The distance between them grew heavier than anger. Adwale finally spoke, his voice hoarse. "I didn't know," he said again, as if repetition could make it true. Zenab turned sharply. "That's the problem," she replied. "You never cared to know." Her tone hardened. You enjoyed looking down on her. She reached for her handbag and straightened her clothes, reclaiming what little dignity she could. "I can't stay here," she said firmly. "This isn't what I agreed to." Adwale looked up at her, panic flaring. "Zenab, wait," he pleaded. "Please." She paused, only briefly. "You destroyed your own home," she said coldly. "Don't drag me into the ruins." Then she walked out, her heels striking the ground with purpose, leaving Adwale completely alone. The house felt different now. Empty, but not quiet. Every room carried reminders of Abeni's presence, the things she had done without praise, the order she had maintained without recognition. Adwale wandered through the space like a stranger, touching walls that no longer felt like his. Power, he realized too late, was never loud. It simply existed. Across town, Abeni drove steadily, her daughter's school address glowing on the dashboard screen. Her hands were firm on the steering wheel, her expression calm. The confrontation had ended, but her responsibility had not. When she arrived, her daughter ran toward her, smiling, unaware of the storm that had passed. Abeni knelt and embraced her tightly. "Are we going home, Mama?" the child asked innocently. Abeni smiled softly. "We're going somewhere better," she replied, and for the first time that day, the weight on her chest lifted. That evening, messages flooded Abeni's phone. Board members confirmed decisions. Lawyers prepared documents. Arrangements moved quickly, efficiently. Abeni responded with clarity and restraint. She had prepared for this moment long before Adwale ever imagined it. As night fell, Adwale sat alone in the darkened house, surrounded by silence he could no longer control. For years, he had mistaken patience for weakness and silence for surrender. Now, with everything stripped away, understanding arrived too late. And somewhere else, in a quieter space filled with safety and light, Abeni rested not because the journey was over, but because she had finally stepped fully into her own life. By midday, Adwale's phone would not stop buzzing, vibrating against the table like an accusation he could not silence. Messages stacked up from colleagues, clients, and managers, all asking the same sharp question he was avoiding. Someone had talked, and the story was already moving faster than he could run. The world he thought he controlled was starting to speak back. For the first time, his name felt heavy instead of powerful. He stared at the screen, unsure which truth had reached them first. At the office, whispers followed him down the corridor, cutting off the moment he turned his head. Conversations paused, then resumed more quietly, as if his presence contaminated the air. The respect he once enjoyed had thinned into curiosity and judgment. He sat at his desk pretending to work, but the numbers on his screen meant nothing. Every glance from a coworker felt like an unspoken verdict. An email arrived, marked urgent, summoning him to a board meeting scheduled within the hour. Adwale's stomach tightened as he read it twice, hoping he had misunderstood. This was not routine, not negotiable, and not friendly. He straightened his jacket and stood, rehearsing explanations that sounded weak even in his head. Power had always protected him before. Now, it was silent. Across town, Abeni sat in a quiet office, sunlight washing over clean glass and polished wood. She listened as advisors updated her calmly, confirming what she already knew. The situation was unfolding exactly as expected. She gave clear instructions, firm and precise, without raising her voice. Every decision was deliberate, shaped by patience rather than impulse. At the meeting, Adwell faced unfamiliar expressions, cool, distant, and unmoved by his discomfort. The chairperson spoke plainly, outlining breaches of conduct and ethical violations. There was no shouting, no drama, just facts presented with clarity. Adwell attempted to defend himself, but his words felt small against documented truth. The room did not lean in to listen. When the decision came, it was swift. His contract was terminated, effective immediately. Access revoked, privileges withdrawn. The title he wore so proudly vanished in a single sentence. Adwell sat frozen as signatures were placed on paper, sealing his fall. He had lost more than a job. He had lost the version of himself he believed in. Zainab learned of his dismissal before the day ended, the news spreading faster than explanations. She sat alone in her apartment, phone in and feeling a strange mix of relief and shame. The man she trusted had been built on arrogance and deception. She sent one final message, brief and final, before blocking his number. She needed distance to breathe again. Thus, Ibn Adwell returned to the house, now echoing and unfamiliar. He moved from room to room, touching objects that no longer belonged to him. The silence was not peaceful. It accused him with every step. He sat on the floor, realizing too late that respect cannot be demanded, only earned. The power he mocked had been real all along. Elsewhere, Abeni tucked her daughter into bed in their new home, listening to her laughter soften into sleep. She stood quietly for a moment, absorbing the calm. Tomorrow would bring challenges, but none rooted in humiliation or fear. She had reclaimed her life without shouting, and the world, now fully awake, was finally catching up. The next morning arrived without mercy, and Adwell woke to a phone that stayed silent. There were no messages, no meetings, no reason to leave the bed he had slept in alone. He stared at the ceiling, replaying every decision that led him here, each one heavier than the last. By the time he stood up, shame had already settled into his bones like a permanent ache. He knew the world had moved on, and he had been left behind. Nothing waited for him, except consequences he could no longer escape. That truth followed him everywhere. It would not leave. Abeni's day began earlier, guided by routine rather than emotion or regret. She prepared her daughter for school, listening carefully to her stories and questions. Nothing in her voice hinted at the storm they had walked through together. After the school gate closed, Abeni sat in her car and allowed herself one long breath. It was not relief, but clarity, the kind that sharpens focus. She reviewed documents on her tablet, approving actions already set in motion. Everything was moving forward, exactly as planned. Abeni did not look back. She had learned not to. Progress demanded it. So, c'est obéit. The afternoon news of Adwell's dismissal had reached social circles he once dominated. Friends stopped answering his calls, choosing distance over uncomfortable loyalty. He walked through familiar streets, feeling unseen, stripped of recognition. Without his title, conversations ended quickly, eyes sliding away. The respect he enjoyed had never been personal. It had been borrowed from status. Now that status was gone. Adwell felt exposed, unsure how to exist without applause. He understood too late how fragile power could be. It vanished quietly, leaving nothing behind. Only memory and regret remained. They were heavier than wealth, and far less forgiving. Always. That same afternoon, legal documents arrived at Adwell's door without ceremony. He read them slowly, his hands shaking as reality became official. The marriage was over. Custody terms outlined clearly and firmly. There were no loopholes, no opportunities for argument. He sank onto the couch, unable to deny what he had lost. Not just his wife, but his child's daily presence. A wave of regret finally broke through his stubborn pride. He pressed his face into his hands, breathing unevenly. For the first time, no one was watching. No one cared. And that truth hurt most, deeply. Quietly, completely. Final, Abeni received confirmation of custody that evening and closed her laptop calmly. There was no celebration, only acceptance. She cooked dinner, helped with homework, and listened. Her daughter laughed freely, untouched by adult failures. Abeni watched her carefully, determined to protect that innocence. She understood strength differently now. It was not dominance, but consistency. Later, after bedtime, Abeni reviewed long-term plans quietly. Her future was no longer constrained by compromise. She had reclaimed authorship of her life. There was peace in that knowledge. And responsibility, too. She welcomed both. Balance required it. And she was ready. Fully. At last. Grounded. Across the city, Zainab packed her apartment slowly, choosing solitude. She replayed every warning sign she had ignored. Ambition had blinded her judgment, and she accepted that. She sent a resignation letter before anyone asked for it. It was the only control she had left. Walking away felt necessary. She needed space to rebuild without lies. Zainab did not hate Abeni. She respected her. The anger was reserved for herself, and that realization hurt, but it was honest. Honesty became her starting point. No shortcuts this time. She owed herself that. And more. Much more. Enough. To grow. Forward. Days passed, and the stories settled into public memory quickly. Adwale's name faded from importance, replaced by new headlines. People moved on, uninterested in fallen men. He searched for sympathy, and found none. Accountability had arrived without ceremony. He was forced to confront himself without distractions. Growth was no longer optional. Across the same city, Abeni continued living deliberately. Her life was quieter, but stronger. She did not seek revenge or validation. She simply moved forward. That was victory enough. Both lives changed permanently. Only one found peace. And it was earned. Quietly, without applause, but with truth. Intact. Finally, time did not pause to explain itself to Adwale. It moved forward without sympathy, marking days that no longer carried purpose. Morning after morning, he woke up unsure where to place his energy, his ambition dulled by failure. The silence that once felt temporary now felt permanent. Without a role, without authority, he struggled to define himself. Each passing hour reminded him that opportunities do not wait for regret to mature. He searched for work quietly, submitting applications with a humility he had never practiced before. Interviews were polite but distant, filled with guarded questions and careful expressions. His reputation followed him into every room, even when unspoken. He realized that respect, once lost, does not return easily. Every rejection reinforced the same lesson he had ignored for years. Power fades, but character lingers. Unfortunately, his had been exposed too late. In contrast, Abeni's days settled into a rhythm shaped by intention. She balanced leadership with motherhood carefully, refusing to let one overshadow the other. At work, her presence was calm but decisive. People listened when she spoke, not because of fear, but because of trust. She had earned loyalty without demanding it. Each decision reflected long preparation rather than impulse. This stability became her quiet reward. At home, laughter filled the evenings, small moments replacing years of tension. Her daughter adjusted quickly, sensing safety without needing explanation. Abeni paid attention to the details she once rushed past. Meals were shared without hurry. Conversations were honest. There was no performance required. The peace she cultivated did not come from victory over another person, but from alignment within herself. That distinction mattered. Zainab rebuilt her life deliberately, choosing solitude over distraction. She enrolled in a short professional course, determined to sharpen her skills without shortcuts. The experience humbled her, forcing reflection she had long avoided. She confronted her attraction to status and confronted her fear of insignificance. Growth was uncomfortable, but it felt real. For the first time, she trusted her progress. That trust grounded her. Months passed, and Adwell's world continued to shrink. Friends he once dismissed now avoided him completely. Social invitations stopped coming. Without applause, he faced himself honestly for the first time. Therapy became a reluctant necessity. The sessions forced him to acknowledge patterns of entitlement and cruelty he had justified for years. Accountability was painful, but unavoidable. Healing did not promise restoration. It only offered understanding. One afternoon, Adwell requested to see his daughter. The meeting was brief and supervised, defined by boundaries he could not cross. He watched her laugh freely with Abeni, realizing how much he had missed. Regret tightened his chest, but there was no space for negotiation. He left quietly, understanding that some losses are permanent. Fatherhood, he learned, required presence, not dominance. Abeni observed the meeting from a distance, steady and composed. She felt no satisfaction, only responsibility. Protecting her child came before emotional resolution. She wished Adwell clarity, not closeness. Her focus remained on building consistency, not reopening wounds. Strength, she had learned, meant choosing restraint even when justified. That discipline defined her leadership, both at home and beyond it. As the year turned, the story lost its urgency in public memory. New scandals replaced old ones. Adwell faded into anonymity. Zanab advanced slowly but honestly. Abeni continued forward, uninterrupted. Time had rendered its judgment without noise. Not everyone received redemption, but everyone received truth. And truth, once revealed, never returns to silence. It simply waits to be acknowledged. There are moments when life grows quiet, not because peace has arrived, but because there is nothing left to argue with. Adwell felt that stillness one evening as he sat alone, the city lights flickering outside his window. He was no longer angry, no longer defensive, just aware. Awareness came late, but it came fully. He finally understood that consequences were not punishments sent by others. They were outcomes shaped patiently by his own hands. He began attending therapy consistently, no longer treating it as a formality. The conversations were difficult, forcing him to revisit memories he had rewritten to protect his ego. Patterns emerged clearly. Control mistaken for leadership, desire mistaken for entitlement, charm mistaken for character. Each realization chipped away at the man he used to be. He felt grief for that former self, but also embarrassment. Growth, he learned, required discomfort without escape. There was no applause for this work, only honesty. Meanwhile, Abeni encountered her own quiet challenges. Strength did not mean immunity from fatigue. Some nights, she lay awake, questioning whether she had been too firm, too unyielding. Responsibility weighed heavily, especially when decisions affected someone she once loved. But doubt no longer paralyzed her. She had learned to sit with it, examine it, then move forward. Leadership, she realized, meant acting even when certainty was incomplete. That clarity gave her peace. At work, Abeni was offered a larger role, one that came with influence and scrutiny. She considered it carefully, measuring ambition against balance. After thoughtful discussion, she accepted, setting clear boundaries from the beginning. Her reputation was built on transparency now, and she guarded it deliberately. The trust she had earned was not something she intended to gamble. Progress, to her, was sustainable only when values remained intact. She refused shortcuts, even attractive ones. Zenob's journey took a quieter turn. She completed her course and secured a modest but honest position. The work was demanding, and recognition came slowly. Still, she felt grounded in a way she never had before. Without external validation, she learned to define success internally. Some evenings were lonely, but they were also clear. She no longer competed with anyone else's timeline. Her life, for the first time, belonged to her fully. An unexpected moment arrived when Adwell wrote a letter to Abeni. It was not a request or a defense, but an acknowledgement. He took responsibility without explanation, without asking for forgiveness. Writing it took days. Sending it took courage he did not know he had. He expected nothing in return. The act itself felt necessary. Closure, he realized, did not always involve reconciliation. Sometimes it involved accountability without reward. Abeni read the letter slowly. Once, then again. She did not cry, nor did she feel relief. What she felt was recognition. The words did not erase the past, but they reflected growth she could respect from a distance. She chose not to respond, not out of bitterness, but because silence felt appropriate. Some chapters do not require dialogue to end. Acceptance can exist without continued connection. That understanding felt complete. Later that week, Adwell met Zainab, by chance, at a cafe. Neither of them frequented any more. The encounter was awkward but civil. They spoke briefly, exchanging polite updates. There were no accusations, no nostalgia. Both had changed too much to pretend otherwise. When they parted, there was no desire to revisit what had been. Closure arrived quietly, without ceremony. It felt adult, necessary. Final. As months continued to pass, the weight of the past loosened its grip on all of them in different ways. Not through forgetting, but through integration. Each carried lessons forward, shaped by pain but not defined by it. Some scars remained visible, others faded. Life did not return to what it was. It became something else entirely. Something more honest. And honesty, once embraced, reshapes everything that follows. On the anniversary of everything breaking apart, the city felt ordinary, almost indifferent, and that indifference carried meaning. Abeni stood at her window watching traffic move steadily below, noting how nothing paused for memory or regret. There were no messages, no reminders, no lingering echoes demanding attention. She understood that closure rarely arrives with announcements or explanations. It arrives quietly when life no longer organizes itself around pain and recovery.